In some areas, for example, renewable energy, food science, and technology, the strengths are distributed among a number of ASEAN member countries. In other areas, there will be one country that's clearly dominant. And these analyses show that although a country may not have strength covering the breadth of an entire subject area, it may have very significant strengths in niche sub-areas. So what this suggests for EU policy towards ASEAN is that it's interesting to consider encouraging and supporting centers and networks of excellence in ASEAN. And that's really for two possible reasons. One is that it could create a convenient point of contact for researchers in the EU in areas that have been identified as high priority. And second of all, it could create an interesting mechanism for internal capacity building. I think we can all see there is a need for capacity building in research within ASEAN, and it could be interesting to allow ASEAN to do that, but with support from the EU. But then again, one has to identify where those strengths lie and somehow help to knit those together. So those are just a few of the conclusions that I see coming out of these very initial preliminary analyses. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Haddawy, for some very, very interesting bulk data on the various areas that people in Southeast Asia are working on, particularly in renewable energy. And
yeah, thank you. I think it's very, very nice analysis and presentation. But I wonder whether the study has looked at any correlation or association between the money spent on R&D and in terms of research outputs. And secondly, what is the overall trend? We see first, especially renewable energy, the R&D spending is going down. That's what the International Energy Agency is saying, and it is not only here, but it's also in developed countries. And to what extent can we attribute these results because of collaboration with advanced countries versus the sole efforts of, like indigenous efforts of respective ASEAN countries? Because particularly my second query is important because your conclusion in the concluding slide shows that it is important to promote collaboration. But that can be only concluded if we show that collaboration is really leading into enhanced research R&D outputs. Is there any effort done along those lines?
Peter, do you want to respond?
Yes, thank you. I'm very glad you raised that point. It's an extremely important question. For one, because if you can show the relationship between funding and research output, you can also identify best practices. You can identify countries or institutions that are making particularly good use of the funding. And so this is something that I'm starting to work on now with UNESCO Statistics Office in Bangkok. It's Simon Ellis heads that office. So working at a national level to look at both research funding as well as the number of researchers in the country, so that we can look at things like what is the efficiency of the researchers, what is the efficiency of the use of funding, how many research dollars are available per head, per researcher, and how effective are they with that money. And I'm also now looking at doing this within some countries. A little bit difficult within the countries because there's a lot of confidentiality issues with the data, but I think we're close to getting some agreements. So I hope we'll be moving forward with those analyses quite soon.
Is it from your study? Do you come up with any suggestions or advice on how to improve the capacity building for the countries which are not fortunate yet, such as Indonesia, which still in low level of publications and citations and etc. Especially for young researchers that you highlight. It's come from the Thailand and other countries. Do you come up with some mechanism how to improve this capacity building for these young researchers? Thank you.
Look, I think one is that there's an obvious need for capacity building, and that can take a number of forms. One thing we see in universities within Southeast Asia is that you tend to have a very large number of very junior researchers. And that's because you have a number of very new universities. You also have some universities that have been around a long time but have recently grown quite a bit. In the second group of universities, it's interesting, you get two groups of faculty, one who have not been very active in research and are fairly senior and probably will not become terribly active, and the junior ones who are more active or would like to be more active. The problem is that there's a lack of people to do the mentoring, right? In the second, they can't do the mentoring because they're not active in research, and in the first, you don't have the senior people. So there's a very clear need for research mentoring. And so that's one interesting kind of capacity building structure to establish. I think but many of the junior researchers, once they have the programs defined, they can carry them out, but it's the first stages of identifying interesting problems and structuring and framing them where they seem to tend to get lost. So I think there are actually quite a number of different kinds of approaches one can take to the capacity building. Also, in terms of research funding, one thing one sees is that it's not enough just to throw money at the research. Oftentimes, if you tighten up the funding a bit, you can actually improve the quality because you increase the competition. So it's a matter of hitting the right point with it.
I think it's very excellent question. But I am wondering, so I am traveling and working with different countries. I found many ASEAN scientists, top scientists, certain women working in the US, Europe, Japan, and a lot of funding, spent on ASEAN scientists in the West. Personally, in my work also, I spend a lot of time in the US because they spend millions of US dollars for me to run the model. So that I think this, so if you account, because of the problem in Southeast Asia, it's the funding, and also the quality of the environment is not so good for, the research. That the quality of the science is problem. So this is the reason why we can find many other top scientists in other countries. So I think if you account this number, I think maybe the picture is changed. Thank you.
So you have a point.
Yeah, I'm from Malaysia. A growing concern among the countries of ASEAN is the research outputs not going anywhere. This is to do with going to the marketplace, to be commercialized. Do you think this can be also included in your analysis?
I think one can, it's a matter of obtaining the data on commercialization. I mean, you can certainly look at also patent activity and the relationship between research activity and patent activity. It's the problem with patents are a kind of an indication of commercialization, but they don't mean that the work has in fact been commercialized, because you can file a patent and it simply sits on a shelf somewhere and no one actually uses it. So you really need to start to look at revenues, licensing of the patents. So if one can get the data, of course, we can do those kinds of analyses. I think another very interesting kind of analysis to look at is the relationship between basic research in basic science versus applied and commercialization, to see does one lead to commercialization more than another.
Good. Yes, the lady in back. Last question.